All right, I think that we are ready to begin. Are we waiting for anyone else to?
Mrs. Evans is on her way down.
Okay. Morning.
It's different from mine.
All right, is there any public comments? Okay, I see none. So we can begin if we're ready.
Good morning, Pastor Matias and members of the board.
Morning.
I just wanted to reemphasize that we have only one agenda item this morning, and it has to do with revisiting of mathematics, and Amy County will provide that for us. I also wanted to mention that you have asked for feeder patterns in data as in respect to the individual schools. We have provided you both. The feeder patterns, I was not quite sure of the question that you had as it pertains to feeder patterns, but I wanted to share with you, and I know we've shared this with the board in the past, that because of the feeder patterns and because our kids do have opportunities to select schools, that the superintendent probably 2 years ago, it wasn't the only reason, identified those common priorities for buildings. So those common priorities are the same across the elementary, middle, and high school divisions, and they were what we are calling the big three. That is understanding the standards, the assessment literacy, and the backwards design. So that has been a important part of ensuring consistency and vertical alignment of our efforts across all divisions, and thus the feeder patterns.
Okay.
Your document that you have regarding the individual math data, I just want to also note that at the bottom of each grade level, there is a district, ISD, and state comparison. So not only do you have the results for 2 years as it relates to mathematics in the district for our buildings, you also have a comparison of what the district looks like against the ISD and the state. I also want to just note that you can see that math has been challenging for not just our district, but our state. In some grade levels, however, the state was able to make improvements. The district was able to make improvements when the other two indicators did not. So I'm sure you had a chance to look at that data in detail, but just wanted to mention those things.
Great, thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry too. I just wanted to mention the audience is kind of thin today because they are out preparing for graduation.
Which is exciting.
And just to mention that one of our board members is not here because she fell and got hurt, and so she's not able to be with us this morning in our meeting, Catherine. So.
Well, good morning, Reverend Matias, Dr. Baker, Ms. Slade. I'm just here to continue the conversation that Mrs. Evans just started, noting the M-STEP data and the challenges that we've had across the state as we get to even the middle school grades statewide. Only about a third of students are proficient on the state assessment. So in in speaking to that, we wanted to sort of share with you things that have happened since the inception of the Common Core standards being adopted by our state, and some things that have been done to support teachers and parents and students. And when the full implementation took place, there was, at the time, although I shared with you last month about our resources not being current enough to have those explicitly shown in the materials, we did do an alignment and a reorganization of units and rewriting of units with teacher teams to produce as much alignment as we could with those materials and to help teachers understand the new standards. Besides that, as she said, the district priority knowledge of the standards is one of the big three, and so there's a lot of building-based work in their PLCs that do that as well. But at the district level, we've done professional learning around that, around understanding those standards, implementing those standards, some professional learning on the deconstruction of a domain. So in mathematics, all the standards are listed under big buckets of domains such as operations and algebraic thinking, or geometry, or number and operations with base 10. We've focused on effective teaching practices that support those standards. So the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics came out with some effective teaching practices a couple of years ago in a book that helped describe things that could support the successful implementation of those standards. And so we've done professional learning around those teaching practices. We've offered to the district many times to teachers professional learning around things like number talks, which build number sense. And so we have many buildings where I've had numerous teachers that have taken that, and sometimes it's a building is chosen to make it a building focus, that it's a strategy, it's a routine, a number routine that you do with students, and it builds number sense. Those are some things. We've been working with some identified teacher leaders in continuing to build rigorous units and lead the learning of their colleagues in the buildings in order to help continue to support that. And then finally, as I mentioned last month, with the adoption of the new curriculum, we're planning a very in-depth, ongoing, job-embedded professional learning plan for teachers with the new materials that obviously are explicitly tied to those standards and will help, and they reflect the pedagogy that's required for these new standards, and it's more explicitly there for teachers to see and learn from. And then as well for parents, there have been some presentations such as to our PAL group on the changing expectations of our standards, school-based presentations that we've done from the curriculum department, but also that schools have reached out to us for information to help on their parent nights and things like that, to help parents understand when the new standards came out, what that meant and how our state assessment changed and how the expectations for students were different. Presentations of the new math program, asking parents for feedback. When we switched to standards-based report cards, the language in the report cards directly reflects what the standards say to help parents understand. And then there's been information put on the website as well, documents that parents can access in both English and Spanish that help them to understand those expectations.
And those documents can be toggled for different languages other than Spanish too, right? So that if
you have Google Translation, I believe. I don't know on our website if we have the ability to toggle to other languages.
Okay.
I know that the one thing I mentioned last month was the new materials have that capability. So the student editions that you can pull up online are already connected to Google Translation. So you can do that with all the new materials and pick from numerous lists of languages. So that if they are working on something at home, parents can help support. And then also some things that have been done at the student level. A few years back, we started intervention classes at the middle school level that are based on evidence-based practices, aligned to our standards, targeted to individual data to help fill in those specific gaps. When new units were rolled out that were Common Core aligned, we had given out a 90-minute instructional framework to teachers of doing 60 minutes of core instruction along with 30 minutes of intervention, so that was dedicated time that was to be spent helping to fill some of those gaps. Our summer school is aligned again to standards and targeted to specific gaps. So we have, again, evidence-based practices such as universal screeners pre and post to those summer school sessions to identify specific priority standards that students are missing proficiency with from that previous year, that's what's focused on in summer school. High schools have academic strategies classes to help support SAT readiness. Some schools have tried things based on the research, trying a second support class like an algebra lab that coincides with the algebra class to help those freshmen with the algebra. And then again, the most recent is this new curriculum that we're looking to implement that again is reflective, like I said, of not only explicitly tied to our standards, but reflective of the instructional shifts, pedagogy that's required for successful implementation.
With either parapros or those that are put in for support services, how are you doing that? Or how are those particular folks qualified or able to teach math and help students?
Well, I think at the building level, those instructional support people support or work closely with the teachers in what they're doing. But I know that as part of the plan with the new materials, we want to have them receive training as well to understand the program and the expectations that go along with it. And then I really just had a slide that sort of summarized the things I shared with you last time, the reasons why we believe the new materials that we're looking at to adopt are going to help support increased achievement in students, and having already seen that in some of the buildings that have been piloting. Just again, the opportunities to read, write, and discuss, so the focus on literacy across content areas, the real-world problem-based approach, which means they are seeing problems and problem types that are just like the state assessment. They're really embedded in that program deeply. Opportunities for assessment is huge. The opportunities within focusing on before, during, and after, and that's part of one of our big 3 priorities with assessment literacy, is understanding the different types of assessment, how to use it appropriately. And so opportunities are everywhere in that program to assess what students know before instruction, during instruction, and after, so that it can constantly inform throughout the whole learning process what to do with students. Numerous resources for supporting teacher intervention, so things to help fill those gaps so that we're not sending teachers off to look in a million different places on their own for some support materials, but they're everywhere. I think I talked last time about such strong support for the ELL students, language embedded within at every lesson level of how to support our English language learners, and written in language that matches our WIDA assessment as well, opportunities for intervention, opportunities for adjusting and differentiation in instruction, a huge emphasis on academic vocabulary, and then of course the technology, a robust technology piece that helps with, again, teacher differentiation, but also so that while students are learning, they're practicing the same kinds of tools that they use on the state assessment, that they are becoming more familiar with computer-based instruction and learning, and so that they see those problem types and those tools that they will encounter on those assessments.
Just for clarity, so when you were looking at, for example, some of the our language centers, you guys took into account the diversity of students that you're teaching, whether they speak Swahili, Spanish, and so forth, that there's adjustments there with the WIDA and other pieces, and then the support staff, so parapros are able to help in those processes.
Yes.
Okay.
So looking at all the, knowing that it isn't, we don't just service Spanish-speaking students as ELL learners, right? So part of it being that the resource had the ability to translate materials into all of those different languages. The fact that that language, those differentiation pieces that are put in there speaking to the WIDA levels are universal practices for students of all language backgrounds.
Great.
And the final thing then, more support for teachers with the inception of this, just making sure that we have many different opportunities for differentiated learning for teachers, this, along with district-wide grade band specific professional learning that they'll do with their colleagues. We're planning on, there's online availability so that they can access anytime learning if they'd like. There are going to be job-embedded coaching cycles where consultants are in the building 5 times over the course of the year of implementation to work one-on-one with teachers, understanding this program, implementing it with fidelity, helping, and the focus in those coaching cycles won't be strictly getting familiar with the materials. They'll be targeted on instructional support practices. So looking at your instructional practice, not just learning a new program. That's part of it, but that can be done in the large professional learning sessions, but the getting into really impacting instructional practice and what that looks like. We're planning on identifying teacher leaders from every building to have more extensive professional learning, to help teachers in their buildings with implementation, to help with family engagement, to help with technology integration. So those early adopters who are really math focused and have always kind of jumped in and been the first to get started with jumping into those kinds of changes will be identified to be teacher leaders. And then also focus on leadership training. So the principals are the instructional leaders of the building, and we want to help support them in understanding what will instructional practice look like. What shifts should we be seeing, and how can you help give teachers effective feedback to make those changes as well? And then last time I talked about just embedded within the program. Within every lesson, chapter, module, there are point of practice, professional learning, mathematical background for teachers, videos, numerous videos of an expert mathematics instructor teaching those lessons so that they can actually have visuals and of what that looks like. So a lot of support for teachers.
Thank you.
Do you have any other questions? That is the conclusion of my information for you.
So I have, and I'm probably because I missed last month's meeting, but so these are all the, this is the prescription for the problem, right? So we're bringing in these resources to help change things. I don't know if, again, I don't want to spend too much time on things that were discussed last month, but I'm trying to figure out what's the cause. I mean, what's the problem? And so, I mean, when I look at, so 2 levels, one is, I'm surprised to see the 3rd grade scores so low. I mean, it seemed, my impression previously was that there was a fairly average growth, and then you got to middle school, and that's where the split kind of occurred. So 2 questions. One is, you know, why are our 3rd grade scores so low? And then secondly, because that's before multiplication tables, I think, and other, so it's basic math facts, etc. But then also I've seen map data at the middle school level, and at some middle schools you get the 6th grade map score and it stays the same. It stays flat. It never ends up, I don't mean never, but it rarely starts to move much. It stays, the 6th grade math abilities are the same when they're in 8th grade, 9th grade. And I know that the reason I've looked at this is because of helping students get into college. You know, I see where they end up kind of stuck. And they're not getting the high enough score in their math, their SATs. So anyway, 2 questions. One is, you know, why the lower scores at the lower level? And I see that statewide. I mean, it's only 40% in the ISD. But what's the cause of this?
Sure. Well, a couple of things that we see. First of all, when we changed over to the M-STEP, It is a more rigorous test. It does require, everything's in a context, so there's a higher reading level that's required, number one. Everything is problem-based. But also, even though you're not far into multiplication and fractions and the topics that really tend to start to see the decline when we get into those in-depth concepts, numeracy is the foundation. And so we need to improve at building number sense in students. And that's why, for one, like I said, Number Talks was something that I've done numerous professional development on, because the number sense, understanding the base 10 and the properties of operations is essential. And so historically in the United States, what we've done is we've focused on procedural fluency, and we haven't spent enough time building conceptual understanding. So do students truly understand what those operations mean, what the properties are, what the structure of the base 10 system means, as opposed to simply being able to repeat procedures that they are, just mimicking example of. And that really is where it is. The test no longer reflects being able to just do that. You won't see many naked number problems on a state assessment. You're going to see things that require conceptual understanding, the ability to use visuals, models of situations. And so we definitely deeply need materials that help support that and help teacher understanding, because it's changed.
Yeah.
Can I respond to that as
Yeah.
well? So one of the things that we have learned through our work with Harvard is that if you do one portion of the instructional core, which we did with changing the curriculum, you have to address the other pieces of the instructional core, which would mean instructional practices, which would mean how we prepare our students as well. So when we moved to Common Core, one of the things that we noticed is it's not just students that struggled. We also put teachers in a trajectory of having to learn and unlearn some of their mathematical knowledge that they had before. As Amy said, we don't rely on the procedural knowledge. It is mostly problem-based, and you and I and most everyone else have not been exposed to that kind of thinking. I think what complicated our problem even more is typically we rely on our materials to support teachers with the kind of pedagogy that they should be utilizing. We, for 5 years, have been using, since the onset of Common Core, the same kinds of materials, and the materials don't support teachers in making that transition. With limited professional development, with the materials that we had, the support wasn't out there for our professionals to help students and to help themselves make that transition. And I think that would be true across the state, because we did not just change in one area. All districts were under the gun for purchasing new materials that would support these shifts in each of the new content areas. That was a huge undertaking for not just Grand Rapids. The other thing that I want to mention, because you represent higher education, is there is, I believe, a misalignment, K-14, between the colleges and universities and what we see happening at the elementary levels, middle school and high school. I don't think that, and we've had conversations with universities about how we begin to get tighter vertical alignment between what happens in our schools pre-K-12 and what happens at the college level. Common Core is saying that we must focus on problem solving. Kids must be able to unpack algorithms and understand why you do certain things. We don't see that happening as much at the college level. They are still very formula bound, and I'm not saying who's right or wrong. I'm just identifying that it may be misalignment between what you're seeing in your position at higher ed and what we are seeing. I took the opportunity to walk into, and I won't say which university, a university classroom, because I had the same question that you had. Why are so many of our kids having to take remedial classes on and on? And I just walked in uninvited and sat down. I think they thought I was somebody's mother or grandmother, so they never asked me to leave. So what I saw was a lot of patterns, a lot of procedural kinds of math. It wasn't what we see at the elementary, high school. It's not what Common Core is asking our students to do. This is, in the way that Common Core is set up, it is probably far more rigorous because it asks us not only to understand the formula, to be able to carry out the procedures of a formula, but understand why each of those pieces are in place. That's a huge shift.
So when you say misalignment, do you mean misalignment in terms of when high school students get to college and they're taking the college math classes? Okay, so, but that would be different than explaining third grade or middle school
Absolutely.
math. But I would say, I mean, the only way I don't really encounter it in relationship to students succeeding in the classroom at college. I just am more so in terms of the math score being a gateway to college. And so then that would be a whole nother conversation. But the fact is that SAT score decides what happens to these kids' lives. And so that's a different thing. What I would like to do is try to find ways to get higher ed more engaged in helping students get to that. And that would be some suggestions. But I agree with what you're saying. So you would say this. So I guess what I'm trying to get is that to what extent is this, do our students get the assessment out of the question? So we're not talking about, do our students at a young age, are they learning math adequately? Not adequately for the assessment, but do they understand math? I mean, maybe it doesn't matter anymore whether or not the assessment, but do they understand? But if they know math, they may not pass the assessment, but they can go on to algebra, right? Mm-hmm. And they can learn algebra. But my concern is that it sounds like there's a base. If they don't have this numeracy base, if they get to algebra, then they're never going to get caught up. So even if they did bad on a test, mm-hmm. they can still learn algebra. But if they don't understand numeracy, then they're not going to get algebra.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, you could say take the assessment out of the picture, but what I think's changed is that the assessment is more reflective of understanding than it used to be.
Okay.
It used to be more reflective of procedural fluency.
Memorizing 10 plus 10 equals 20, but not understanding that.
I think that is true and not true. I think it is what Common Core has taught us, mm-hmm. and what history has taught us is kids have to do both. They can't be bogged down in problem solving and they don't have fluency around math facts, simple facts, or a good number sense. And so I think what we see reflected in Common Core is the need for both. And for a while, our district made a complete shift. Let's think about problem solving. And then we say, well, wait a minute. While we're sitting here talking to our high school teachers are saying, no, they just have to come in with math facts. I'll do the rest. So what we're learning, there is a delicate balance. Kids, we don't want to say they have to do everything, but in a sense, they have to do some critical things very well. Both of them having to do with that factual piece, but also a deep understanding of what's behind the facts and procedures.
You know, in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of the things that Stephen Covey says is have the end in mind. And I think we need to, particularly in this area, if our end is they're college ready for math, you know, let's forget all the other subjects that then we need to work backwards as well. Obviously, you know, there's standards to consider, but still we need to really be able to go back and say, 3rd grade, how then are we laying the foundation for this? And then looking at these other pieces and adding what we need to.
So
but it's really critical.
I think that's an important comment. One of the things that we were very clear about as we pursued another program was how well do we get information from the system on our progress of students? We don't want to wait until the end of the year or to their 11th grade before we have a good handle on where their deficits are. And I think currently we are at a disadvantage. I think about 3 to 5 years ago, the board asked us to start considering more technology with our adoption. One of the things we've asked is that the technological pieces give the system the ability to collect data on our kids so that we can be more responsive in real time. Not a month later, not 2 months later, not at the 11th grade year, but to give us more real-time data on how to intervene on behalf of our student. We've asked that of not only of math, but also for social studies, on and on. But as I said, when you move the cheese in one area of the instructional core, according to Dr. Elmore, you must also address the others. So as we introduce technology as a way of monitoring, that means there's a new learning curve in place for our principals, before our leadership team around us. All of us have to learn now how to readjust our behaviors to use that new flow of information.
And I would think that that's a given, that the team is going to be forward looking at those issues on how to address, how do we monitor. That's why for me it's important to understand feeder patterns and how you're passing the baton, so that the data's there, so that we know what we're getting as we're looking at these scores. We're like, whoa. So that we're able to figure out what do we need to do, as Dr. Baker is alluding to. So what is the cause? What are the issues? It's not just Common Core came in, we had to change our curriculum, but this is something that's been happening. And so, yes, we're playing catch up, or we're realigning some things, but still, it's been an issue. And so, it's critical that we continue to fight for getting our kids college ready, career ready, certainly, with where we know the world is heading to, and the kinds of skills that they need in order to be successful. So, and this is one of these arenas that's a game changer for a lot of our kids.
So, two quick. One, so based on these changes that we're doing in terms of helping students and teachers and parents, so this is the fix that we need. Is there something missing, or is this what we, in other words, is there something missing that we're not providing that we're going to end up 5 years from now wondering about these test scores again? Because I've been here for 10 years, and this isn't new, like John was saying, but and I know there's nothing magic, but is there anything missing? Do we need like twice as many tutors? Do we need what do we need, or is this it?
Go ahead.
I'm going to go back to, and you've been here 10 years and I've been here a long time.
Yeah, it's like,
one of the things I do is rely on some of the mistakes that I've made, and as well as some of the experiences. And one of the things that the superintendent presses us to do is to think about what implementation really means in our district. So we've learned a lot about what implementation has to mean. We may be edging upon some things that I think could be very important. But we also have to consider that the written curriculum is one part of the change process. Change comes through the instructional core, the dynamic between the curriculum, the student, and the teacher. So now we have a fix around the curriculum, the written curriculum, the written and assessed curriculum. Now we have to build the muscle of our constituents to do this work and make the shift. It's a huge shift. And when we work with teachers, we don't find teachers that don't want to make a shift. It's getting the time and space to learn how to make and manage those shifts. We can put them in a 4-hour PD, But then you go back to a classroom, there's 27 children. Are you truly ready to make those shifts? What we've asked in terms of Common Core probably is greater than we've asked in a long time, and coupled with the fact that we believe all children can do this. So if you say, what else do we need? I would say we look at the instructional core, and I also would say some of the work that Amy has done about getting closer to the instructional core, and I'm saying now to the teachers, by working with teacher leaders, knowing that PD, an introductory PD is important, but what happens after the PD to get into the classroom, to stand next to a teacher, to help a teacher plan, to hold their hands, to give feedback, to have them give feedback. We're learning ways to work around contract issues, on and on, to make sure that that happens. Because what we find is it's not a lack of will, is that there are some deep structures out there that hold us in our place. So when we can build the muscle around instructionally, provide the rest, the curriculum that we need, and then the third part of the instructional core is student, we have some building to do that probably wasn't there in the past, and figuring out ways to even address that has been our work as well. So you say, what is important? I will always say, you probably go to my grave saying, yes, our kids deserve the very best materials. And the materials must align to what the state is asking them to do. And it must support the pedagogy that teachers are expected to provide. I think that was a huge piece, and I thank the board, and I thank the superintendent for going out on the limb and making it happen in a couple of ways. I feel good about that. I feel very good about that. But it's not all of the story, and I want you to know that. I was in a meeting with a superintendent not too long ago, and that person said, I got the materials and that should do it. No, it won't do it. There
That's what I didn't say.
It's not the
See
only.
magic bullets up here. So.
No, there is a lot of work.
Okay.
Dr. Matias always talks to us about what can we do with parents. I understand why he's saying that, because when we say all kids learn, that means that's a community learning, to look at learning and the new challenges together. It's not just within the school day. It will take all of those things. So
I think
I
one
would
of the
say our implementation, and I would like to have a conversation about that, because I just wrote up some things for the superintendent around that. Our implementation probably needs to look differently. We've gotten the materials. How we work with the people who are on the firing line is going to be extremely important. So how we remove barriers to make that happen.
And I
how
think-
we give them the release time. How we walk next to them.
one of the things that I was encouraged about was when you all brought in the teachers who were actually, playing with the silly putty of it all, and then looking at their students and saying, Juanito here and so there, and they knew how to implement it for that particular child. Okay, I'm going to put this group over here because they're at this level, and this group over here, and I'm going to be able to sift through, because now I know what the issues are cross-culturally. I heard some of the teachers talking about their students in ways that they were informed on some of the cognitive ways that their students were processing and thinking through things. And that's really critical. I think one of the biggest things for urban districts is the fact that we have so many different kinds of students. And we're seeing that even in our graduations. I mean, how many of our students were speaking different languages, even from addressing their peers in their speeches? We have to understand that, not just in this arena, but in the other social studies and so forth, to allow some of the ways that occurs. And for our teachers, I think we've heard our superintendent say that. I think one of the critical things is that our teachers understand who they're teaching, who's in front of them. And if they can do that, then they're going to be able to tweak all those different pieces, because now they see the strength that they bring in, not the deficit. And that's really critical. We have to shift that mindset as opposed to saying, well, that ELL student has a deficit. Well, no, maybe they have some strengths coming in, and we have to know what they are because they're there. And that's really critical, not just our ELL, but our other students. So that's really critical, especially in this arena. So I'm glad that you're bringing in a lot of the data.
Can I say that one way that the board has helped us, and I'm hoping you will help us in the past, is that there are deep structures that hold things in place. So the plan that Amy has prepared around PE means we have the ability to work with teachers through the day while the problems are occurring on and on. That rubs up against things like contract, release time, on and on. Those are areas where after you have approved this purchase, where you can begin to help us work through, that's out of our arena. And we want to do that kind of work in conjunction with GREA. We have a good relationship, I feel, at this point. We don't want that to be a sour thing. It has to be a collaborative way that we can give teachers space and time and support to learn in a real-time way, and not rely on the introduction in the beginning of the year, and once again, that you wouldn't be able to carry out the shifts that are required of teachers with that amount of training. So if you are asking what else, I think we all have some skin in this game because there's some work for all of us to do.
And I would just say, just to follow up with Mrs. Evans, what she's saying, again, thank you for your support with this as we introduce this, and I thank the superintendent. But also, it is so important that we build up all of our students' mathematical identity, right? That not just teachers strive to do that, but that everywhere. So another way that you can support is that whenever you go out in the community and you speak to people, that we talk about mathematics as something that everybody has access to. Everybody's a math person. So the next time you hear somebody say, well, I'm not a math person. Yes, you are, right? You are a math person, because we would never go out in the world and say, I can't read. It's socially unacceptable. But we would go out and say, I've never been good at math. I can't do math, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a huge mind shift. So when we talk about changing that instructional core and helping teachers make the shift and shifting our curriculum and the student, that begins with sort of our society, and it's how it views mathematics, and that everybody has access to mathematics, everybody's capable, and that we need to build that up in students and remind everyone out there that we're all capable of those things. And that we're all math people. So that's another way you could help.
We failed to give you the instructional council.
Okay, just quick before we go. So real quick, I think that I'm glad that we ended up talking about structures, because that's what I was trying to get at. Not that we hadn't fixed things in 10 years, but that we need to structure. I mean, we've seen the state in the last 5 years shift dramatically in terms of the way it addresses literacy. So literacy is like on the minds of every legislator and every school person, and then again, when I see kids that I'm trying to get into college, I rarely see them not be able to meet the reading levels that are necessary to get into college level reading. But I often see kids end up stuck in remedial classes, and that becomes a barrier, not just getting to college, but it means that those students are forced to stay in a classroom with other struggling students who don't know math, and they've been doing that for years. They're never in a math class with a math whiz, right? Because they're constantly in classes that are behind. And so I think that it ends up and I've worked with students to try to get students that go to Ferris into these courses in the summertime, so that way they don't have to take it during the school year, because that means that they can start college when they become freshmen instead of spending college doing Algebra 1. So structures, I mean, I think that the board can help shift the conversation to seeing numeracy as the same kind of urgency as literacy, and I think that we have to do that. Secondly, I think that we probably have access. I know I have a lot of young math professors at Ferris that would love to participate, and I've talked to them about in terms of at least understanding the way math is learned in a way that can help them at least be better teachers at the college level to get this alignment that Carolyn was talking about. But I think more so is to help the kids get to college. So, and I think the other thing about this this kind of cultural structure, the math teachers I talk to in GRPS are really big problem solvers. They sit up at night trying to figure out ways to help kids learn math. And so I think that the alignment is them leading the challenge, that this is getting these, I mean, and you've probably already done this, I don't want to tell people how to do the job, but I know some really good math teachers, and they just rack their head trying to figure out ways to teach kids math.
Can I give you another example of teachers working with, I'm not saying all teachers, but we've been working with a group of what we are saying, hopefully, teachers that will be teacher leaders in the district. We hope that brings them to this committee and let you meet them at some point. But some of these individuals have met with the curriculum staff on Saturdays. I don't think did we pay them for that? But I don't know if you can pay a person enough for a Saturday, especially if you have families. But they have met on Saturdays to develop units that are aligned while we wait for this new material to come. So I think that is to be commended. I know that this work won't happen in isolation. We've learned a lot about how to implement in any content area. So I think bringing them on board is going to be, giving them the space and time, honoring their work, on and on, will be important pieces of that.
Sorry, Dr. Matias, I'll let you have the meeting.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have instructional council that I skipped right past, but it's a very short report if we have time.
Yep.
Okay,
We can do
that's
that.
about the review of courses that were introduced into the system.
You can do that in 10
Review.
minutes or so, right?
Very sure.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ms. Slade, Reverend Matias, and Dr. Baker. I have a very brief instructional council update. There were no new courses presented at the last meeting in April. However, we did have updates to 2 brand new courses that were supported by the council last year and implemented this year. Spanish for Health Careers at Innovation Central, and American Sign Language that is currently being offered at Grand Rapids University Prep. Dr. Malunge Kalambula, who's not able to be here today, did provide some additional reports that I think you have attached to the instructional council update. Just slight overview, the Spanish for Health Careers at Innovation Central is actually taught by 2 teachers. Initially, it was going to be just Mr. Stephen Brennan, but there is a professor from Grand Rapids Community College, Josefina Faldivar, and she is an interpreter as well as someone who's taught individuals to interpret, and she co-teaches with Mr. Brennan at Innovation Central. There are 17 students that are currently this year in that class, and that class, I'm really intrigued to go see how it works. They have 2 portions. One is the standard content, and then there is the interpretation portion of that content. The students are enrolling in that course for fall, and so that course will continue and hopefully lead to some employability opportunities for the students in the program. The American Sign Language is taught by Ms. Christina Van Dam to students in grades 8 through 12 at Grand Rapids University Prep. There are 33 students. What is very interesting is that the TPR, or total physical response technique, is the way this class is taught, so that it's not, you can't just sit still when you're doing American Sign Language. You're up and you're moving, and you are very active in the class. One of the pieces of feedback that Dr. Kalambula gave us is that by the end of the block that the students are taking the course, the students are exhausted, and so is the teacher, because they are very actively engaged in learning the language. Our next meeting, which will be the last meeting of the year, is next week, Thursday. We will hopefully have an update from C.A. Frost, Innovation Central, and Grand Rapids Public Museum School on some of their new curriculum opportunities for students for next year.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much.
If there's nothing further, we are adjourned.
All right.